This is the story of my stepfather, Jon Miles, a Vietnam vet and well-known community activist in Tucson, Arizona, who has fought for the rights of the downtrodden his entire life, even as he battles cancer. His activism could be traced back to his experiences in the Vietnam War, when he was drafted into an artillery unit in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. After Vietnam, his labor organizing led to representing blue-collar workers in the mining industry. It led to meeting Cesar Chavez, the leader of the Farm Workers Union, and it even led to being investigated by the FBI. I am Ramon Bannister. My intent here is to document what made my stepfather into the type of man he is today. But in many ways, this is a journey into my own life and discovering who I am. Previously on the Jon Miles Series.
So I had about maybe 10 of my people at that intersection for when they had to wait there while we came through. So I managed to get back there by the time the anarchists got there because somebody called me. Anarchists wanted to stop, block traffic. We just kept people going. We almost walked right over them. So they had no choice. We had a mass of people just move them down the road. We got to the park, and then, of course, this guy, Roy Warden, and his small army of haters, and basically racist haters, were there at the park. And they had a little area, and the cops had surrounded them to kind of protect them. So I had my people, and we all had these orange vests, safety vests. So I had all of my people surround the cops.
Also trying to keep the peace, a group of volunteers from the other side who formed their own circle around police and urged troublemakers to stay away.
There's nothing to see here. Ignore the ignorant. Ignore them.
But with emotions running so high on both sides, for some, that was impossible.
People, these young, because the schools, there was walkouts of all the schools. I mean, Tucson High, Pueblo, Cholla, Sunnyside, Desert Vista, the high schools, even the elementary schools, the kids just walked out. The school people tried to stop them. Some schools where they had fences, they just knocked down the fences and got out. They broke out of the ground, so the schools couldn't do anything. So we had all these kids. Then there was a lot of home construction at that time. That was the so-called building boom. Construction work stopped around Tucson. You had all these construction workers came and marched. It was just... There's a movie out called A Day Without a Mexican, and this was like it. It shut down the construction industry that day because everybody took the day off, or the undocumented people and the people that supported them. So it was really a huge success. But then what happened in the park, I had my hands full. Man, we had so many people. That whole Armory Park, it's not called Armory Park, it's Military something Park, but it's at the Armory Park Senior Center. There were so many people you couldn't keep track. And meanwhile, the cops let me know that they had all these squads around, and motorcycle squads and helicopters and riot police in case anything happened. So with my group, I had Lorena Howard. She was like a big woman, and she's well-known, strong voice, that she was really keeping the people away from Roy Warden because he was threatening to burn the flag, but he didn't. So finally it came time he was going to burn the flag, and all the youngsters, the high school kids, everybody's around. So he gets his buddies there, and he's got a stick, and he puts the Mexican flag, and he's got a loudspeaker, but he's advertising, you're going to go back to Mexico. He's talking all this racist crap, and he's going to burn the Mexican flag. So, all hell was going to break loose. And meanwhile, our rally was going on at the park. We had speakers, we had mariachis, we had all kinds of good stuff going on. But, all the young people wanted to be where this troublemaker was. So when he threatened to burn the flag, I mean, we had thousands and thousands of people coming around. He got his buddy, Russell Dove, put the flag on a stick, and then they got charcoal lighter fluid and soaked the flag in charcoal lighter, and then they got one of those little starters and started, and the flag started burning. So a lot of the kids, we had water bottles. So the kids took the caps off and were throwing water at the flag. Well, supposedly, and I didn't see it, supposedly one of the cops got hit by a full water bottle. So then the cops went and they grabbed this girl, a young woman, and they took her. Instead of taking her out of the park, which was one street, there was a street nearby. These guys were right on the shuffleboard court right next to the sidewalk on the street. Instead of taking her there, these cops marched her diagonally across the park with all these kids running after. And meanwhile, motorcycle cops come in and riot police on the streets. They were convened like a block west of where we were on the other side of the children's library that's down there, across from Armory Park, across from the big park. So they went. So I was trying to get our people to stay back. So meanwhile, they're spraying. There's a helicopter going over, chop, 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 chop. And then you got all the motorcycles coming in. Then you got all the screaming and yelling. And the kids are taking these girls, and some guys are coming to try to pull the young woman away from the cops, and they take him, and all these cops come in, and then they get down to an area where they had all these guys with their shields. And they got these people they arrested behind those shields, and then we were outside that, and they were squirting us with pepper spray.
Live, with coverage you can count on, this is News 4 at 5.
More than 15,000 people show up in Tucson today to rally for immigration rights, and at one point the rally turned rough. Good evening, I'm Tom McNamara.
And I'm Martha Vasquez. It's being billed as a national day of action for immigration justice. From Phoenix to Philadelphia, thousands walk the streets demanding immigration reform. A large chunk gathered in downtown Tucson. Marchers met this morning at Ajo Way and 12th Avenue on the south side and walked downtown to Armory Park, where a huge crowd was already waiting. The rally, organized by the Border Action Network and other local rights groups, drew more than 15,000 people, including thousands of students who either didn't show up for class today or walked off campus. The rally protesting a congressional bill making it a felony for illegal immigrants to live or work in the United States. At one point, News 4's cameras caught a scuffle on tape. We do know that 6 people were arrested and a Tucson police officer was injured. We also know Tucson police used pepper spray gas to control the crowd. One of our own photographers caught in the crossfire had to be treated at a local hospital. Scuffle happened right after a group against illegal immigration burned 2 Mexican flags during that rally. News 4's Sandy Rathbun was there. She begins our team coverage. Sandy?
It was the second time in 2 days that members of a group called Border Guardians burned Mexican flags.
One nation, under God, indivisible.
They pledged allegiance to the American flag. Then they burned 2 Mexican flags.
We will burn every Mexican flag in America.
About 15 members of a group called Border Guardians staked out a piece of Armory Park to conduct their counter-protest.
We are not going to sit idly by, watching you invade our land.
For 2 hours, the Border Guardians made speeches, played patriotic music, and defaced Mexico's flag. They walked on it, ripped it, punched holes in it, and pretended to bullfight with it. Then they soaked it with lighter fluid and ignited it, calling it a symbol of the government of Mexico, and in their words, it's lawless people who invade the United States and then demand rights.
They have no business making foreign policy or immigration policy, and they have no business asking to be granted or demanding special rights, because they're not special.
Some threw rocks and bottles at the group. Others held signs. Both sides tried to outshout each other.
No se puede. We se puede.
Through it all, police encircled these protesters to try to protect them.
I think that, make a long story short, that the cops are the ones that provoked the riot. Even though Roy Warden and his haters burned the flag, that got it going. But when the cops just took the two of them, grabbed that young woman. She was, I think, a high school kid. Grabbed her and took her. That's when the proverbial blank hit the fan, So then that happened, and so then that was a date that will live in infamy because it didn't happen just here in Tucson. In L.A., Chicago, Miami, big cities, New York, they had these huge, protests against the Sensenbrenner bill, and because there were, Sensenbrenner was saying there was 20 million undocumented, or he didn't call them undocumented, illegals in this country, and we're going to deport them all, and we're going to build these, detention camps and round them all up, and total nonsense, just like Nazi Germany, rounding up the Jews and the people to put in these concentration camps. That's what it reeked of. But it was April 10th, 2006. So shortly after that was May Day. We'd have a May Day event every year too to celebrate May Day. So we had a May Day rally at the park, but we didn't have a march. We just had an educational, where a lot of the kids left schools, and we had like workshops in the senior center itself and the activity rooms, and then in the park, and it was kind of low-keyed. But meanwhile, the city of Tucson, called us together. We can't. This guy Warden isn't going to go away. He has every right to be in the park that we do. It's a public park. It's First Amendment. Blah blah blah. So my argument was that he was inciting a riot. Where do you draw a line from First Amendment rights to inciting a riot? This can't. We're going to be having events like this in the future, and we don't want this to continue happening. So they said, well, we'll see what we can do. So it was a pretty good meeting that we had anyway. So then they called a couple of months later. They called for another meeting. The city did. So we went and they said, well, we have an exclusive use permit that Parks and Recreation has, and what it does, there's certain guidelines that you use that you can have an exclusive use where you abide by these guidelines beforehand. You can deny people entrance to your event, or you can kick them out if they're in there too. And if they don't leave, you can have them arrested. So great, how do we do this? So I got together with some attorneys and some people, I think Pancho and Isabel, me, and the Parks and Rec people, and found out what we had to do. So basically, that was going to be my responsibility to set up the parameters when we had an event at the park. All these things, we had to meet all this criteria for the Parks and Rec Commission to give us this exclusive use permit. So we did it. So we had our big May Day event come up, and we had it there, and Roy Warden and his buddies tried to get in, and the cops, the senior officers, the cops were around, assistant chiefs and captains. But it was my show. So when Warden came up, I stopped him. I said, "You're not welcome in here." He said, "Why not?" He said, I have my constitutional rights. I said, "No." I said, "We have an exclusive use permit where we can deny people access to the park, and I'm denying you access to the park." I said, "If you step 1 foot into this park, I'm going to have these police officers arrest you because they're here. I have witnesses to say I told you." I showed him a copy of the exclusive use permit, so he backed off and he looked at it, got together with his buddies, and they decided, well, they weren't going to try anything. He said, "Well, I'm going to see you in court and this and that." And I said, "Well, that's your prerogative, So he stayed outside there. He had his megaphone and talking all kinds of racist crap. "Go back to Mexico, you wetbacks," and stuff like that. All stuff when we came into the park, So we effectively kept them out. So then we knew, wow, we got something with some teeth in it. So then we would have events. We had a big speaking event inside in the ballroom at Armory Park Senior Center. So we got an exclusive use permit for that because they wanted to try, and because Raul Grijalva, who was our congressman, was going to speak, as well as other dignitaries, and this was on immigrant rights and on human rights, etc., like that, about the politics of it all. and the status of the Sensenbrenner bill. So we had exclusive use permit. Well, Warden didn't try to come in, but one of his buddies, Russell Dove, was going to come in. So Warden set up on a corner, on a street corner, and he had this big megaphone out there talking to people when they're coming into the event with all his racist crap. So we had some of these Chicano lowrider guys that got the loud music and all that stuff. They parked their cars right around him and boom, 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 and all that stuff, just drowned him out. It was great. It was, I don't know who thought of that, but these kids did, and and even the cops were upset. And I said, no, I said, this noise ordinance. I said, look, I said, the neighbors haven't complained, not that there's many neighbors in that area, but I said, it's still early, a noise ordinance, 10:30, don't tell me about the noise ordinance. So they let it go, but Russell Dove tried to get in. So, and I met him right there at the door, and he had all this photography gear, and he had this telescoping pole that he had his camera on, or some way where he could take still photos, but he had other, I guess I didn't really look at his camera, but he came to the entrance to the ballroom, so I stopped him. I said, Mr. Dove, you step 1 foot in here, and I'm going to have these cops outside. I'm going to have you arrested. This is America. You can't keep me out of here. And he's screaming and yelling. Meanwhile, I remember Raphael was there, Pancho was there. They came, I had some backup right there at the door, because the door is only like 2 doors, the entrance. So he really couldn't get in. He screamed and yelled. So I told him, well, it's your choice. He came in, he raised ruckus, so the cops took him out. So the cops said, do you want him arrested? Before I could say yes, Cat Rodriguez said yes. So the cops arrested him. So this is going to be the test. This will be the test. It'll go to court if it ever gets to court. So they found Russell Dove guilty of violating the exclusive use permit, and he got 3 years probation. He wasn't allowed, because he had a record beforehand, I don't know if that, but he got 3 years probation. He couldn't come anywhere within 400 feet of any Derechos Humanos event. And he had to forfeit any weapon. He couldn't have his weapon for the period of time he was on probation, because he had a gun. He couldn't have a weapon, and he was fined. He got a fine on that on top of it. So, wow, there really is teeth in this, So Roy Warden was in the audience and all that. He had a few of his buddies in the audience at the courtroom. So when the decision came down, it didn't come down right away, but we were elated. So then we knew our program was going to work. So whenever we had an event where we'd go through the paperwork on the exclusive use permit, we'd put it all up. We got real good at it. Then one year when we had this group called the Angels or something, what they did, and it was great. Because I got pretty much up to the beginning of the march by the time we got to the park. When we came there, these angels got out there, and there must have been 10 of them. They spread these on these poles, these plastic pipes, and their wings, where Roy Warden and his people couldn't see anything, and our marchers couldn't see them. And he was there with us. He had a pretty good sound system, but they couldn't see him, So we had these angels escorted everybody from the march into the park. And it was really great, and that just frustrated the hell out of Roy Warden. He just didn't know what to do, So he again tried to get in after that, and I wouldn't let him in. And I told him, look, we have teeth in this ordinance. You know what happened to your buddy Dove, Russell Dove. And of course, Russell Dove was nowhere around there, because if he was, he would have been arrested for violating his probation. So we did this. This went on like 2000. I think in 2012 we did it, where pretty soon it was pretty much Russell Dove and maybe one other person. But because he lost, he had even those kooks on the right they were kind of fed up with him, because he was something else. He's still around too, but he tried to get in, or made an effort to get in, but he had somebody filming this time. He had a film crew and somebody taking still pictures, and had me talking to him on, about the exclusive use permit, what was going to happen. And
right here, you can't, Mike Rankin, the city attorney,
I mean, I don't have that. You're welcome to walk in here, and then we're going to have you arrested. Why? Because we have an exclusive use permit. You're not allowed.
You read this letter? Can you get Kathleen Robinson over here? Kathleen Robinson, come over here.
Yes, sir.
You read this letter by Mike Rankin?
Yes, I have.
Have you read the second page of it?
Yes, sir.
Does it not say that you may not use an exclusive use permit to keep people with contrary political views out of a park?
We have every reason to exclude you, sir.
No, you
They
don't.
did not want you in.
You know,
You
okay.
cannot enter the park.
Did you read this letter here? Mike Rankin said it's lawful. He said it's lawful for us to be in the park. It was lawful in 2006, even with burning the flag, and it's lawful today.
Sir, you're not welcome inside the park. You're
By whose
welcome on
authority?
the public, I'm telling you.
This
You're
is public
welcome on
property.
public property right now.
This
You're
is
fine
public
where you
property
are.
there.
They have an exclusive permit. They're utilizing the park. When
But
they're
it
done
says,
with the park,
it says right here,
the park.
it says right here, you may not use an exclusive use permit to keep people out of a public park.
Your interpretation
Did you read that?
is
It
wrong,
says it
sir.
exactly, and that's Mike Rankin's interpretation from the city attorney.
Then you contact Mr.
We all
Ray,
have this
sir.
on film.
You contact
So
Mr. Ray.
what are you going to do if I try to go in there?
You'll be arrested.
I'll be arrested. Fine.
he had a picture of me talking with these captains and lieutenants from the police force. And as it turned out, there was an event just last weekend, and Roy Warden wanted to do a protest event at Golf Links in Swan, and he has a Facebook page, and he had pictures on his Facebook page, and somebody said, "Hey, I saw your picture," meaning me, on Roy Warden's Facebook page. I said, "Yeah, what happened?" "Well, you at this demonstration stopping him from going into the park," I said, "Well, great," And he just used it trying to draw people to the park, saying he was denied participation. And this was, the event last Saturday was a completely different event. I wasn't involved in it. But anyway, so Warden found out there was teeth, so what he did, he took all these pictures and threatened he was going to go to federal court and one thing and another. Yeah, fine, whatever. So then, 2013, it's kind of May Day wasn't the big thing it was, and the whole movement wasn't like it was with the undocumented. So he never even showed up, I think, 2013. And then after that, I didn't really want to do it anymore, It was just pretty time-consuming. And, I mean, heck, I said, I'm getting old now, and I need people. Somebody's got to be my lieutenant. I'm willing to train people. But, I couldn't really find anybody who would want to do it, So finally, I just said, enough is enough, So then pretty much some of the anarchist-type people took over running the May Day thing, which was fine with me. I would march with them and all, but it was totally unorganized, and it wasn't so big. It wasn't such a long march, and it really now became hardly anything now. But in the meantime, I think it was 2015, maybe late 2014, that Blanca calls me from the Derechos Humanos office, said, "Hey, we just got these papers in here that, subpoenas to go to court. Roy Warden is suing the Tucson city government, basically, and Derechos Humanos, and the tall activist with a cap and the short activist, meaning me and Paul, who were like the guys at the park, dealing with him at the park. But he didn't have my name on it, and it was addressed, it wasn't addressed to any individual, but inside the subpoena that he was subpoenaing 25 John and Jane Does that he didn't know our names, but he had all the names of all the city officials. So what it was that he had a certain period of time to serve me, but he didn't know my name, and I was rather disappointed in a way because he knew who I was. I mean, he was in court when I testified against Russell Dove, his buddy, where you have to give your name and your address and all that stuff. And I was disappointed he didn't know my name. But anyway, he never got to serve me. And it was a matter, he would send these paperwork to Derechos Humanos, You know, he'd have some process server and he'd put things in the newspaper. But Paul and I, he could never identify us, and finally was going through all the preliminary stages in federal court that the judge finally said, well, you know, you haven't been able to serve these people, so, you know, it's not, you know, I'm going to dismiss them from the case. Here it is, 2018, and it's still going on. The judge denied him his rights, so he appealed it. So, and this has taken since like late 2014 till, I think it was appealed like, 2017 that he filed an appeal with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So they finally got back to him and said they would hear his case. So it's kind of in limbo right now. Basically after that, you know, I really kind of winding down my activity. I would still go to events, still doing things. I'm still working, but I still go to Derechos Humanos, but the funding has been drying up, you know, because we're kind of a hardcore group in a way that what we do is, you know, we're adamant about the militarization of the border. It's got to stop. Tear down the walls, man. You know, and we're against, you know, beefing up the Border Patrol and doing all this because they're not only going after people they think are undocumented, they're going after people with documents. There's a lot of harassment where a lot of these other groups, they say, yeah, we need comprehensive immigration reform, but we can have militarization too, where we're all we're against militarization, but comprehensive immigration reform we're for, but no to militarization. So the grant money that's out there is going to these groups that want to play ball with the Congress type people. Like we're kind of too radical, so we got to scrap and fight for any monies we get. So that's basically, you know, kind of where I'm at, you know. But
First of all, can you just identify yourself, name and occupation?
Okay, my name is Roy Warden. I'm a full-time political activist here in Tucson, Arizona, and I originally came from Berkeley, California in the 60s and was a part of the anti-war, pro-civil rights movement. And while I was in the Army, I had occasions, I was never caught, but I had occasions where I would sneak out at night with a can of paint, white paint, and I would paint big, fat peace symbols on the sides of armored personnel carriers and tanks that they had at the training base.
So it's interesting that you guys wound up being on the opposite side of the political spectrum regarding the immigration debate.
I don't think we really are, because I've never had, or very rarely had, the opportunity to sit down with people from the so-called other side and fully explain my viewpoint. And whenever I have been able to, they've understood it, and we've come to very common ground. My opposition to the what I call the open border issue is that because of my experience in the legal system and my knowledge of how things work, there's a great deal of self-interest and vested interest within the legal community to continue on with the issues of open borders. And they want a never-ending number of people to prosecute and defend and adjudicate, and then they put people in prison, and they never want that process to stop because that's where they get their employment.
So you're not necessarily anti-immigrant?
Certainly not anti-legal immigrant, never has been anti-legal immigrant, just against the whole process of illegal immigration, which also employs drug cartels to smuggle in drugs. And I've actually sat in trials over in federal court where the poor guy, he was an illegal immigrant coming in, He was basically forced to carry a 40-pound sack of marijuana and cocaine. And because of that, he ends up in federal court being prosecuted for smuggling narcotics and marijuana. And his family was all distraught. And of course, it never would have happened if there had not been an organization, the cartels, smuggling people in for money. It's a commercial enterprise of, crime-driven, a horrible enterprise involving child sex exploitation, human trafficking, and all that stuff. And it's that process that I object to.
Okay, so that brings to mind immigrants that try to come here illegally, but not through one of those illegal business networks that you mentioned.
Yeah.
What would you say about those people?
I will say this: it's God bless them. It's a dangerous journey. I don't approve of it, but I feel great sympathy for them.
If you're sympathetic to the plight of immigrants who are simply looking for a better life, why did you organize that counter protest in 2006?
And I can answer that very simply. This open borders movement has been going on for a long time by what I consider to be left-wing communist agitators, and I say communist in the sense that they may or may not be members of the party, but they were totally against the interests of the United States government and looking for a way to overthrow the American government. That's always been a part of the communist ideology. And people were parading around with Mexican flags, and as they did in the park that day and as they had before, they said, we're going to take over Arizona and we're going to give it back to Mexico. We're going to, the land was originally stolen from Mexico and we're going to give it back. Well, I was opposed to that. And I've talked to many illegal people here illegally, and you know what they told me? They said, we didn't come to America to have Mexico follow us here. And so you see, the people of illegal status themselves are not the people who were demonstrating in the park in 2006 or at any time. So I burned the flag as a signal of opposition to that movement.
I'll just boil it down to what some people say is that the burning of the Mexican flag incited a riot.
Well, this is very, very clear because you see, here's where my background in law comes. Very important. Flag burning is a legitimate part of demonstration. It's been protected by the Supreme Court, and it's basically what they call symbolic protest. People who don't understand the process say, well, that incited a riot. No, a riot occurred, but it wasn't legal incitement of riot. They were simply unhappy with what I had to say, and so they rioted. They became angry and rioted. They didn't want to hear this. They didn't want to hear how Mexico was exploiting its people.
I mean, you know that people sometimes think that you're a racist. You mentioned that earlier. So this has nothing to do with that or with like any relationship with white supremacists or anything like that.
Okay, and this, yeah, and here's what I will do. I'm glad you added that last part about white supremacy. I can send you a link, an article I wrote, and in it has a link to what they call white nationalism. That's basically white supremacy and so forth. And they say, we went down to the Warden rally the other day. I'll send it to you. It'll explain itself. And Warden told us to get the hell out. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. I totally hate and oppose white supremacy. Hate it. Absolutely hate it. As much as I hate the Communist Party for what they try to do. You see, I think political movements should be based on principle, not on skin color. And I think the people who organize the Raza movement saying we should have unity because our skins are brown, I think they're just as racist as the white supremacists. It's exactly the same thing. What you have to stand up for is dignity and respect for all people of all colors. But people don't want to hear that.
Well, I want to talk about the exclusive use permits.
Right. And there's video of this on YouTube. And one of those videos that comes up shows a confrontation where I actually, for the first and only time, met your stepfather. He was at a rally, and I was trying to get into the rally, and I had a sign of Emiliano Zapata, because I'm a great fan of Emiliano Zapata and the Zapatistas. And so I got a picture of Zapata and saying, I stand up for the dignity of people and they shouldn't be oppressed. I support Zapata, and I want to tell you people why you're misinformed on the issue of open borders. I want to tell you people why it's horrible what happens to the people that come in. You don't know what happens to these people. You don't go to court and see what happens to them. I'm in court all the time, and I do see what happens to them. And so that's what I wanted to tell them. But they had what's known as an exclusive use permit, which they used to keep me out of the park, and the police enforced it. That's totally contrary to the law in what they call the Ninth Circuit, which is all of the western states. They say you can't use a use permit, exclusive use permit, to keep people out of a park when they want to demonstrate and speak. And that's very, very important, because what's happened in the last 2 years after Trump was elected, there were all kinds of white supremacist marches back east. And they tried to get exclusive use permits. And the people that wanted to oppose them, and I would have been one of them if I was living back east, said we want to go into the park and counter-demonstrate anyway, to tell these people we don't like white supremacy. And they did. And there were all kinds of arrests and all kinds of legal problems coming out of that. Because in America, people have the right to go into a public park and demonstrate, and you can't keep them out by use of a permit. That's what the law in the Ninth Circuit case is called Gateswhite, Gathrighd versus City of Portland, and they explain just why it's important for people to be able to go into a park and demonstrate and counter-demonstrate. They explain it very clearly. I filed a federal lawsuit. The federal judge ruled against me. I appealed it to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal. They disavowed their very own case. They refused to apply their very case to my circumstances, because they support open border policy and I oppose it. That's why it's going to be up to the Supreme Court. Everybody in America has the right to stand up and say what they believe, whether you agree with it or not. And so I've got a legal case which will go to the Supreme Court, and we'll see what happens. I'm not all that hopeful on it. Frankly, they only take 200 cases a year. They get something like 10,000 cases. They simply get too many, and they don't have the infrastructure to deal with every time a state breaks a law.
What last words or last comments would you make to Jon Miles directly?
If I could sit down and talk with him, I'd like to share many of these ideas, and I'd like to talk to him about it in a civilized. We wouldn't be arguing. Simply to talk to him about it, he and I maybe would have the same opinion on what we should do and what we should not do. We would agree on much of it. You see? But that's what happens when you don't let people speak equally and freely in a public park. You don't understand the other side's position. That's why free speech is so important to protect.
Dr. Swathi called me and said that there was definitely cancer. As it turned out, that this lung cancer that I had, it was as a result of exposure to Agent Orange when I was in South Vietnam.